Hi everybody, Dave Rauch here, and welcome to the Maintenance Manager. Today we are lucky to have Bill Naumann from the Naumann Law Firm, which is located near here actually.
We're neighbors.
And thank you very much for being here. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
And we're going to discuss a number of issues. 326, Champlain Towers, construction defect litigation, which is your specialty. And so why don't you take a minute, Bill, and just tell our viewers a little bit about the Naumann Law Firm, where you service, things you specialize in, which I believe is CDL.
Yep, we are a boutique firm. We do 100% construction defect cases. That's all we do. I've been doing it for 40 years. I actually started in an insurance law
40 years.
40 years ago, interpreting the insurance policies that builders buy. So we would have to explain to the insurance company, you need to defend this developer because it's covered under his insurance. So, which comes in very handy nowadays because the insurance industry just keeps changing all the time. So again, we're a boutique firm. This is all we do. We don't do general counsel work, although we sometimes end up with issues regarding reserves because sometimes associations haven't been reserved properly. We see that a lot of times in condo conversions where they've represented that the streets are 5 years old, they're really 35 years old. So we do get into those kind of cases as well.
And is your practice here in San Diego County, all of California, outside of California?
So it's mostly been Southern California, but the world has changed in the last 3 years. I mean, everything we're doing is remote now. So the courts are encouraging us not to show up in court, to just go on either Teams or Zoom and make your appearance in front of the judge. Board meetings are all remote. And so we're starting to do cases in Northern California, Central California as well, because once you've got the site inspections and destructive testing done, the board meetings are remote. Even the mediators and the settlement conferences, they want those to be remote.
Jeez.
So, you know, to a certain extent, you don't have to leave your office for many of these cases.
And like you said, that a lot of attorneys are working from home remotely. So a lot of law firm offices are downsizing. Is that what you're seeing?
Yeah, across the board. Across
the country.
Across the board. I think real estate's, everything's local. You know, it's location. But we are seeing that. But we still like having a presence in our office. So we don't need as much space as we did. But I like having the members of the firm in the office at least a few times a week.
Sure.
But it does give you a lot of flexibility. It really does.
Yeah, but it really is a huge change in the industry.
It is.
In the legal industry, especially with everything being digital. Have you noticed any other industries, insurance industry, any other industries other than hospitals and law firms becoming more digitized, more remote?
Well, if you don't mind me talking about insurance law, it tends to bore some people, but it's been a huge change in construction defect litigation. I mean, 25 years ago, we go to a deposition, there'd be 35 attorneys around the table. Insurance companies finally got smart and said, why should we be paying for the insurance company for the builder and 35 subs?
Right.
So now we get into a case and the builder has bought a wrap policy that covers all of the sub trades.
Right.
So now we're dealing with one attorney. Sometimes we get our cases done in 6 months or 8 months when the builder has bought a project specific policy. It's great.
Yeah.
Less expensive, much quicker. And there's a lot less defense attorneys with jobs, right?
Yep.
You've gone from needing 35 defense attorneys, there's only 1 or 2 defense attorneys on the other side.
Jeez.
So it's really changed the insurance industry.
Some good news.
It's very good news for HOAs. A lot of our cases, we can get finished very quickly.
A lot of HOAs policies are getting killed. In other words, some policies that were $50,000 a year are now $500,000 a year. I think it's because of the fires, and the insurance industry took a major hit because of the fires. And as we all know, insurance companies never lose money.
That's true.
They just pass it on.
They're kind of like casinos. Usually they win.
Yeah, isn't that funny?
They always seem to make a profit at the end of the day.
I wish I had gone into insurance. But what do you see in the insurance industry in terms of, you know, the homeowner associations? Because there's a lot of board members that are viewing this video, a lot of managers. And for them, they're just seeing stars. They're seeing pain. So what do you see in
It's-
terms of that insurance
It's
hit?
it's a problem, even for with single family homes that are not HOAs, just policy and premium. I mean, the policy limits are being reduced, the premiums are being increased, and it's happening to everybody across
Yeah.
the board. It's not only that, but it's the continuous mudslides that happen after the fires. And so they've just taken a hit. So the 4 months of rain hasn't made it easier for the
yeah.
insurance industry. So I think we're going to see even more increases.
Yep.
So I think boards need to be proactive, and when the reserves get set up initially, that line item for insurance needs to be much higher.
Yeah.
So all the new projects that are just starting out better take a look at their reserves right now.
Boy, and as you know, there's only, I believe now there's 9. There used to be just 7 states that required reserve studies. Florida, as I've discovered, was one of the states that didn't require reserve studies. It does now.
Yeah.
But geez, can you imagine the poor states that aren't even reserving any funds at the inception of their new communities?
I don't know how that even worked.
Let's talk a little bit about construction defect litigation, and that's your specialty in your firm. And what you see as the trends going on in that industry. Are you seeing more CDL? Are you seeing less CDL? I think with the new deck law, maybe the trend is a little bit more, but I really don't know what's going on in the industry. I'm not sure if our viewers do either.
You know, to us, it seems like nonstop construction defect litigation. In the last 4 months, our phone has been ringing off the hook.
Wow.
Everybody that might have found out that their roof leaks 5 years from now, everybody's finding out now. Everybody. If something leaks, it would have leaked in the last 4 months because we've had 4 months of rain. I mean, it's just been nonstop. As long as builders are building, there's going to be construction defect litigation.
Yep.
And it's a pretty unusual HOA that doesn't have a case.
Sure. God, you bring up a great point because those atmospheric rivers just have saturated the state of California. And so there's not only roof issues, there's subsidence issues, foundation issues, erosion issues, landslide issues. I mean, you're probably reading about a lot of this different stuff, not just the cases that come in your door.
Yeah. Oh, there's been many, many landslides everywhere. We've got a number of them going right now, one in LA.
Oh, you have?
Yeah, we got cases in LA. We got one that was actually the lead story on the news about a week ago where the mud actually came down into the street and the cars started sliding all over the place, crashing into each other.
Oh, wow.
So not only do you have the damage to the home, you got all these the damage to all the vehicles driving by.
Yeah, it's crazy. We had a community we maintain, I think it's in La Jolla, but I heard about it because the guys reported a sinkhole. And then the next day it was a lot bigger, and then a lot bigger, and we reported it to the city, and they didn't seem to be interested. So I guess the sinkhole has to swallow a car before you get the interest of the authorities. I'm not sure.
Well, I don't think I'm telling any secrets, but most municipalities have a fix it when it breaks policy. I mean, some of these underground sewer and drainage lines are 50 or 60 or 70 years old.
Yeah.
And they can't afford to replace all of them. So they wait until it breaks or leaks, just like what happened on the freeway in North County.
Right.
Then they fix it.
Oh, that was a big one.
Yeah, it's just huge.
So in addition to subsidence and roof issues and all of the different and standard construction defect issues, have you seen any oddball ones, any weird ones that are interesting?
Just when I think I've seen everything, you see something else. We've got a case going on right now. It's a high-end home in La Jolla, where they built the home it got half built, and then the recession hit in 2008. It stopped being built for 5 years, and then a new builder picked it up and finished it, and everything leaks.
Oh, geez.
I mean, everything leaks.
And that's the same materials?
Well, you got a second builder that came in, tried to finish the project.
Boy, there's a lesson there, huh?
We got a very expensive home on the beach in La Jolla where they put the underground ducting under the slab. If you can imagine that. So anytime your air conditioning doesn't work, you have to jackhammer through your slab.
Jeez, that's
It's just
crazy.
not a good idea. So builders are always trying to push the envelope and come up with something new and creative, but sometimes it backfires.
Let's talk a little bit about SB 800, which is California's right to repair law. And then, of course, I think most of the other states have their own versions of their right to repair laws. I know Texas is a little different. It's funded. Nevada's is kind of odd.
Right.
But let's
Right.
stick with just California. So, we have the 7 defenses, which is, the builder makes the repair, or the builder pays cash and gets a release, or there's an earthquake, or I wonder if atmospheric river falls into the act of nature. Because
Well-
an act of nature is one of the affirmative defenses.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
talk to us a little bit about, those affirmative defenses on the cases that you see. Do you see homeowners and developers putting forth those affirmative defenses in any particular combination?
You do see the affirmative defenses for sure. My former firm, we helped negotiate SB 800, so I feel like I got blow by blow reports on how the bill was being developed. So I think I know what the Building Industry Association wanted to accomplish, and at the same time, I know what we wanted to accomplish on the homeowner side. I think if you did a survey, I'm not sure builders would be terribly pleased with the way the statute has played out. And the reason I say that is because builders want to have the opportunity to make the fix, but once they learn that it's millions of dollars to make the fix,
Yeah.
they'd rather turn it over to their insurance.
Right.
Otherwise, it's coming out of their personal pocket or their
Yeah.
pension plan or their profit sharing plan. So what we see is all determined by their deductible. The builder may, if their deductible is $50,000, they'll spend $50,000 to fix things. Then they turn it over to their insurance company.
That's interesting. So it goes back to the insurance company, huh?
Everything goes back to insurance.
Well, I remember in January 2003 when the law passed, and that the Silicon Valley Manufacturers Association, which was actually pushing to get something passed because, there were no condos being built. The insurance company had just taken a hike. There was no insurance the builders could get to build condos. So I think the intent was great.
Yes.
But the problem, I think you've identified the key problem, which is, it's just, it goes back to the problem is a lot bigger than just in a house because they hypothecate to the whole community. And so the repair is actually huge, back to the insurance company.
The smaller the fix, the better chance it works because then the builder can come in. If it's, let's say the builder's got a $250,000 deductible, they've got to spend that money before their insurance picks up. So they're willing to do that. So if you got smaller issues that could be taken care of, then it works better.
Yeah.
But if you get into these major cases, the builder sometimes will fix 10 or 20% of the problem, but then the case continues on with the other 80%.
Well, I do recall back then too, about the time of its passage in 2003, that a lot of builders were using third-party quality control firms like Quality Built and West Coast Property Consultants and Pacific Interwest up in San Francisco. Do you still see those guys around?
We don't, because the way the statutes, it's difficult to bring an action against a building inspector.
Yeah.
So we almost never name them in our cases, almost never. Plus, they've got there's a lot of caveats for inspectors because they're not doing destructive testing. They don't really know what's going on inside the building. And frankly, we don't know until we do destructive testing to find out what's the cause of the leak.
Right.
It could be, 100 different things.
Yeah, and going back to SB 800, that was really the essence of it, which was anytime there's a leak, that's a defect.
Right.
Anytime water went through the roof, went through windows or doors, came through the foundation, that was a defect. And that was in the 47 functionality standards, I recall. So,
everything's functionality
yeah,
standard.
functionality, no water.
If it leaks, cracks,
Yeah.
falls,
Yep.
erodes,
Yep.
slides,
Yep.
it's covered, which is great
Yep.
for consumers.
Yep.
Great for consumers. In terms of builders, I mean, there's been this drive for infill projects, which you see up and down the state.
Sure.
So I think city councils have tried to limit the urban sprawl. They saw what happened in LA, and they want to try to limit that. So in a lot of municipalities, you're seeing projects shoehorned into little areas. We're working on one that's really close to the train in North County, and they squeeze the project in
To fit this weird shaped lot.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's caused a lot of problems. It's caused a lot of problems. So
Interesting.
we see a lot of mixed use cases. We had a case in Coronado where the residential was on the second and third floors and it was leaking down into the commercial.
Yeah.
Happened to be a dentist office.
Oh,
So he
great.
was not happy.
Yeah,
So there's a lot of mixed use projects that
Oh.
raise additional issues.
gotcha.
A lot of other construction defect
Yeah.
issues that you see.
Gotcha. And so your go-to phone calls are to the insurance companies. You're working a lot with the insurance companies.
All the time,
and
all
their
the time.
counsel.
That's the first question we ask: is the builder
Yeah.
in business, first of all, to make
Yeah.
sure, because there's a lot of smaller, contractors and builders that have gone out of business over the years.
Is the policy intact?
Is the policy intact? What's the deductible?
Yep.
Does it have a soil exclusion? I mean, they're very manuscripted policies now. Every policy is different.
What are your thoughts on what's going on with the industry in terms of not just turnover of managers, but the roll-up of management companies, the turnover of management companies?
It's not only management. We come in, since we don't do general counsel work, we're brought in usually by general counsel or by an HOA board or the management company. They're the first ones that contact us. What we see is when we start to research the case is we see that the association's gone through 3 general counsels, 3 management companies,
Wow.
and 3, a
Jeez.
rollover of board members. So we need to then piece together the history of the project going back 10 years. So it's not only management companies that get replaced, it's attorneys too.
Yeah. Why is that? Why is there so much turnover? Why do boards feel so compelled to, terminate their management company, terminate their attorney, general counsel, terminate their vendors? They just,
I think
the grass is greener, or do you think it's because they're not professional business people? What do you
that's
think
a whole nother problem because poor homeowners come in, they have no training.
Right.
I mean, you're a member of a board of directors for a corporation.
Yeah.
I mean, association is a nonprofit. So you're a board of directors, you're supposed to be knowledgeable, and board members get no training. So
Exactly.
they're kind of dependent upon management companies and attorneys to educate them, to know what's going on. So I think as soon as you change over board members on the board, maybe they don't click.
Right.
And so their personality doesn't mesh.
Well, I think you've identified
So,
industry problem number 1 is lack of board member education,
yes.
which is huge. Let's talk about conflict of interest with management companies doing their own landscaping, their own maintenance, their own services like that.
Well, I was trying to think of a situation that would cause problems. If they're going to do their own maintenance, what if the gates break down? Maybe somebody that's not invited comes into the project. Maybe somebody gets injured or attacked. I mean, that's a lot of potential liability. So if I was running again, I'd be going back to insurance. I'd be talking to my insurance company and say, look, we're only a property management company. We're going to do maintenance too.
Yeah.
What kind of insurance do I need to have? Because things happen. Stuff happens all the time. Somebody could trip, hit their head, end up with a very serious injury.
Jackhammer their toes off.
Yes.
We've
yes.
seen, we have a sizable company here, and safety is critical. And we just can't seem to do enough safety training because it's such a dangerous occupation.
I think it's
and I guess management companies, they're looking at the gross margins, and it's competitive. There's a lot of management companies, and then they're looking at the checks they write to contractors and landscapers and other vendors, and they're thinking, oh, we could do that. But they don't realize how dangerous it is. And again, I think you're right. Insurance companies have the answer.
Well, we're in the age of specialization. Everybody specializes.
Yeah.
I think it's hard to be a specialist in property management and also be a specialist in property maintenance. It's a whole,
I know.
because there's so many sub-trades. You're dealing with security firms, roofers, plumbers, HVAC engineers. You're dealing with everything that occurred in original construction.
But it's interesting. It's something that we're seeing in the industry. More and more management companies are considering providing services like that. I think it's following the lead of some of the big national companies. Let's switch to 326, which is your specialty. SB 326 and the new deck law. We had discussed, before we started here, structural engineers and architects being the only ones capable of doing the inspections. And I know you've probably seen how expensive the inspections are. So do you see the law changing at all in the next year or two to allow other entities to do inspections?
I don't know what the solutions are yet, but I can point out some problems.
Okay.
One of them is the statute doesn't require any destructive testing. So nobody's opening up walls
They're
or
not.
decks. That's not required.
Oh, I thought
They can use moisture meters. You can use other tools. So you're getting an answer, but at least in construction defect cases, we don't really know the true answer of what's causing a problem with a deck until we open it up.
Sure.
That's not required under the statute.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I believe the legislature did that because if you had required destructive testing, it would have made it so expensive
Yeah.
that nobody would have done it. Nobody would have been able to afford to do it.
Yeah.
But it doesn't necessarily get to the bottom of the problem.
Right.
It's like you see the symptom, but you don't know the cause.
No, and we use the FLIR, the forward-looking infrared.
Right.
It can detect heat differences
Yes.
and water, which is really the difference in the
Yes.
temperature of the water and the surrounding air. But yeah, I think you're right. Without actually looking at the support beams and the joisting, it's hard to tell if something's going on in there. But
Yeah.
I would imagine if something were going on, it would have happened this winter with all this rain.
That's true. This has been a good stress test
Yeah,
for
stress
all,
test.
all the projects
term.
out there. All the projects out.
Great
Another
term.
thing is, if you,
Stress test.
I think the one thing that we're going to see in the future is this only applies to common area. So I've heard stories coming back that some HOAs are amending their CC&Rs to make the individual unit owners responsible for the decks. Then they don't have to inspect them.
And you're seeing that? You're
I've
seeing
heard
a lot of
stories
those
about it.
documents? Okay.
I've heard stories
That's interesting.
recently that that some HOAs might amend their CC&Rs.
But that's a great point that you bring up, and two things that come to mind. One is the law doesn't pertain to mid-rise or high-rise, and of course with Champlain Towers, that's a whole different can of worms. And then number two is that there's a lot of other things at a community that need to be inspected in addition to the exterior elevated elements. I mean, drainage swales, concrete drainage swales. There's all kinds of pumps, sump pumps, desiltation basins, perimeter fencing. I mean, I could,
retention
if we had a
basins.
little more time, I could tell you the story about this 9 miles of fencing outside of an association on the golf course in Carlsbad. But basically, it hadn't been looked at in 7 years, and it had fallen apart and cost that association millions. So that's a case where that's not a deck, but yet it still definitely needs to be inspected. So there's a whole host of things that need to be inspected on a regular basis. And we like to say at least once a year you got to look at all the common area elements.
We always tell boards, do the complete inspection and do it before the 10-year statute is up,
Yes.
because what you'll find out is you'll learn what was built right as well as what was built wrong.
Yep.
You might find some things like what you found. We had a similar case where the board didn't realize they were responsible for a hiking trail outside the perimeter walls of the association. They had no
Really?
idea. And a homeless camp had sprung up there. Huge
Wow.
potential liability there because hikers were walking by and they weren't able to understand the CC&Rs well enough to understand they had additional responsibility. So it's very important to have that inspected
That's interesting.
and checked out so you're not missing something.
And you found that in the documents? They didn't know about that?
No, they didn't know about it.
That's crazy.
At some point in time, it was going to be dedicated to the city of Temecula for another thoroughfare or street,
Yeah.
but they didn't know it. It had
Oh,
never
that's-
been dedicated to the city.
There's always so many interesting stories with HOAs, aren't there?
It's endless. It's endless. Just when you think you've seen everything, something else
Yeah, and
pops up.
And in that case of that 9 miles of wrought iron fencing, that did go to a construction defect suit because the developer had not installed this fencing to spec. They installed some of it. Some of the fencing had been dipped in polyurethane, but a lot of it hadn't. That was the first problem. And then the other problem is the spec called for a little 2-cent plastic cap on the bottom of the picket. And without that cap, the water gets in there from the golf course, the irrigation water, and it just blossoms into a rust ball. And that rust goes down on the wall, and it just looks like hell.
Yep.
And so it's those two little things, right? And then the developer ended up paying for it. So there's such detail involved, but I'm really concerned that there's so much focus and money put on the inspections of all the decks and the exterior elevated elements that associations managers might forget all the other stuff that has to be inspected. That's a concern I have.
Oh, and when we settle our construction defect cases, the insurance companies are saying, sign here, promise never, ever, ever, ever to sue us again. So when we do a construction defect case, we have to make sure we've looked at everything.
Interesting.
Because we're giving up all the rights. You get one
Interesting.
bite at the apple.
Yep.
So we try to inspect everything, and we try to get reports from inspections that have been done in the past
Yeah.
by the Protex of the world,
Yep.
and find out, what's there, what should we look at, what do we
Yeah.
need to consider.
Speaking of which, that's another odd development in this new law is that some law firms, and I'm sure you've seen this, have been offering free inspections as long as the association is still under 10 years old. What do you make of that? It seems kind of gratuitous to me.
It is. It sounds like a marketing ploy.
Yeah.
It sounds like a marketing ploy.
I mean, we know
but-
the inspections are expensive.
Yes.
I mean, are they going to be good inspections that are done? That would be one question. Another is how are they going to pay for it if they don't find any defects? I don't know what boards are thinking when they see that.
We would do a free inspection if the board was considering a construction defect case, and they said, there's some red flags here that we want you to check on. Then we would do it. We wouldn't just do, willy-nilly do, 100 deck inspections. But if the board's got a concern, a specific concern, then we might call in an engineer or an architect to take a look at an issue.
Mm-hmm. Which brings to mind another question I have for you. So we know under the law, you have to inspect, I think, 95% of, or some large portion of the decks at the community. And I know there's a mathematical formula to determine that.
Well,
Fortunately, we're not doing inspections, so
you're not.
so
Okay.
That's
Well,
great.
let's talk about that, because
So what are you seeing? Are they doing them all that they need to do? And then what happens if they don't?
the statute says the engineer's got to have a 95% confidence level.
Confidence level.
It doesn't
okay.
say you have to inspect all the decks. So what I would do in a construction defect case, if we have window leaks, if we test, let's say 10 units out of 100, all 10 units leak, the courts allow us to use extrapolation and statistics.
Mm-hmm.
And so then we can make the argument, we've tested 10 units, they all leak, we could extrapolate it to the entire project. And I think HOAs need to start thinking about that.
Yeah.
If they've got a 100-unit complex, have the inspector look at 10 units.
Right.
And if they want to, they might be less expensive to get a statistician to pull numbers out of the hat.
That's a great
Sometimes
idea.
at a law in litigation, we'll actually hire a statistician to pull the numbers out of the hat. That could
Interesting.
save HOAs a lot of money.
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't have to inspect every deck,
And nor should you.
nor should you.
Some are very well maintained, very well built. So
Yeah.
and I would say that the inspectors probably have a good feeling when just taking a look at a deck whether it's got problems or not. But
Yeah.
but like there's a lot of things you can't see on the surface.
Right.
Change orders.
Change orders, unwritten amendments.
So you're seeing less decks have to be inspected, less expense. So that's good news.
But I think a lot of associations are really stressing about this.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You know, it's a huge expense.
And it's coming quick.
So,
A year and a half.
Yep.
2025.
Right.
So I'd like to switch over to Champlain Towers South and the collapse because again, like the Berkeley deck collapse, it resulted in 98 deaths. A very tragic situation. And in that case, that building was built in 1980 and there were known problems and almost from the beginning. And in that case, there were no inspections. They did finally do brought in an engineering company, Morbido. They did a full inspection, mostly a structural inspection. But it didn't take structural engineers to see that there was water ponding in the pool deck.
yeah.
The rebar was rusting and spalling out concrete. It doesn't take a structural engineer to see that stuff. And water flooding into the basement all the time. Some bad stuff going on at Champlain Towers. So anyhow, I'm sure you've represented some mid and high-rise
Yes.
communities. Any lessons that you can think of from Champlain Towers? And let me say first, too, that I was also on the 2 task forces for CAI National, and we did the public policy report, which recommended that builders provide 3 things at the inception of all new communities. 1 is maintenance protocols, maintenance manuals. 2 is a reserve study, and 3 is a maintenance program. So you actually have to do the inspections.
Okay.
And this isn't just a structural inspection, these are just inspections of all the common areas. So, is there anything you see in addition to those things that you think should be done?
Well, I mean, I think most people understand just by common sense that a small problem, if it's not fixed, ends up being a big problem later. And so it's so much less expensive
That's the
to
truth.
take care of it early on and find out what the cause is. If you've got a stain on the ceiling, it could be something minor. On the other hand, it might be something major. And so it's better to find out the answer sooner than later. What we see in our construction defect cases is a lot of underground parking structures that have the white powder, the efflorescence that's coming through the walls. That's caused by bad waterproofing on the other side of the wall.
Right.
That's not a problem for 1 year.
Yep.
But if you let that go for 30 years, that water's going through the block walls and rusting out the rebar, which
That's the
holds
key.
the concrete together. So you don't want that to go on. Otherwise, you end up with another, Champlain Towers.
Yep.
So water is kind of the enemy of the building envelope.
Yep.
And so we want the water leaks to stop sooner than later.
Yeah.
And you want to detect it sooner than later.
So true. You've probably been in enough
It's-
cases with building scientists to know that waterproofing is not an exact science either. That
not.
the building industry is constantly coming up with new methods to better waterproof building components. And it's a very inexact science. And back in 1980, 1990, waterproofing was not really well done. And in addition, like you pointed out, if you get water on certain waterproofing materials,
Yes.
it disintegrates
Disintegrates.
and it
falls
has no
apart.
value.
Yep. We've seen that over and over again.
Keeps us in business.
Unfortunately and unfortunately, yes.
Well,
yes.
Bill, anything else on Champlain Tower South collapse or the high rises that you work on here in California that you'd like to discuss?
Well, we do see planters being a real problem because you have to waterproof the planters too. And I think that may have been a problem in Champlain Tower. So it's not only got underground basements, parking structures, planters. The subcontractor's got to follow the manufacturer's recommendations. So, and a lot of times those things are, you got to study them to make sure you're installing the product properly.
Yep.
So a lot of times it's just subcontractors who don't know how to install the product.
Yep. And in addition,
So
a lot of waterproofing has to be reapplied on a regular basis. In other words, you have to take all the plants and all the dirt out and re-waterproof that planter bed.
right.
And that's just not doable.
Right.
It's-
It isn't. It
It's
isn't.
not doable.
So I would just say for any association that has planters
Yeah.
and underground parking structures, anything that's, or flat roofs, we just see it all the time. It's very difficult to get that right.
Yep.
So
Well, as you mentioned earlier, if we had more time, there's so much we could talk about. But I want to just thank you, Bill, for being here
well,
today.
Thank you, Dave.
Edition. And I want to thank you, everybody, and please stay safe and stay dry, too.